Hi there, and welcome to the Explaining History YouTube channel. I'm going to attempt in the next few videos to talk as much as I possibly can about Russia from 1881 to 1989. So it's going to be quite an undertaking, so bear with me. I'm going to start by talking about Alexander II. And I'm not going to begin at his actual assassination in 1881. We're going to go back a few stages and talk about the kinds of things that motivated him. Alexander II comes to the throne during the Crimean War. His father, Nicholas I, dies really a broken man, destroyed by the Crimean War. And the death of Nicholas I, the ascension of Alexander II to the throne, and the defeat of Russia all coincide to produce a sentiment in Alexander and some of his more reforming ministers that something desperately needed to be done about Russia. Russia had been defeated and humiliated by two seemingly smaller powers, Great Britain and France, and there was a mystery as to how this had been achieved in certain bureaucratic and aristocratic circles in Russia. And the reality was obviously that Britain had an industrial revolution and France was in the processes of experiencing modernisation and industrialisation. Britain had been able to lay a telegraph line from the Crimea to London. Britain had built a railway line from the Suvla Bay to the front line. Britain had been, and France had been able to sail iron-hulled battleships into the Black Sea, much to the amazement of the Russians, who did not believe that anything other than wood could float. And the British mini rifle, spelt M-I-N-I-E, not M-I-N-I, was able to fire further and more accurately than the Russian muskets could, and that meant that the Russians could never really compete with a smaller force of British soldiers. So industrialisation and modernisation trumped Russian military power every single time. Alexander has a deep and profound dilemma over this. He realises that Russia doesn't have the social or economic base to be able to compete, and that Russia hasn't got the legalistic and infrastructure in order to facilitate an industrial revolution. And the other thing that Alexander is aware of is that wars like the Crimean War created opportunities for serfdom, as he put it, in its greatest fear, to reform itself. When the Russian Empire was plunged into crisis, serf uprisings were a distinct possibility, and they began to happen during the Crimean War. And this meant that, in Alexander's view, not only was the reform of serfdom necessary in order to jolt society forward and create a stable, prosperous agricultural class who then would buy from the towns and cities, stimulating growth and facilitating not necessarily industrialisation, because this isn't necessarily what the Tsars particularly wanted. This was actually quite a bad Western European thing, but stimulating some trade at least that would boost the Russian economy. Also, getting rid of serfdom would be ideal, because it would help to diffuse centuries-old tensions in the countryside, which could potentially sweep the autocracy and the aristocracy away. The problem for Alexander is that the end of serfdom is extremely difficult. It is resisted by the landowners, who believe that they are losing the bedrock of their wealth, endless amounts of free labour, and their status in the countryside. And these landlords also fear what the countryside will become if the peasants have no whip hand over them. And Alexander III swiftly introduces the land captains after his father's death in order to bring the countryside back under control. Alexander II is harassed at every turn by intransigent landowners who don't want to bring about these kinds of changes until he essentially orders it. He says, this must happen, make it happen, get on with it. The compensation deal that the landowners get is immense. They get a large payout from the state for their troubles, for their losses, and the state then dumps the burden of that debt on the peasants. So the peasants have to have decades of debt in order to ensure that the landowners are adequately compensated. And in addition to this, the landowners in many cases pull out a kind of a rather nasty fraud on the peasants. They retain the best land for themselves, the black earth soil for themselves, and pass on to the peasants the rather scrawnier, the rather more sparse bits of land that nobody really can farm on. So the peasants are freed from serfdom into debt and into penury, and it's no kind of freedom at all. And the level of peasant uprisings dramatically escalates in the years after 1861. And this is a permanent feature of rural instability that doesn't go away, and it's, I suppose, only really finally resolved by Stalin, which is way ahead in this series of videos I'm going to do. And so you could argue that it is the failed emancipation, because the emancipation is of such magnitude that ushers in a revolutionary period of change in Russia that only really resolves itself in 1928. Anyway, next video we'll look at Alexander II's other reforms. Anyway, hope you find this useful. Remember, if you do like this and you find it handy, subscribe, tell a friend, and I'll catch you on the next video. Thanks, bye.